Hello and welcome to Sass Bites. This is your weekly bite of Sass during your lunch break. I'm your host, Micah Godbolt. I'm flying solo today as Elise has got some other stuff she's got to get done, so we'll say hi to her hopefully next week. But as you know, if you have been watching the show, we've been going through a kind of a new series. It really all revolving around this concept of front-end architecture, something I spoke about last year at CSS DevConf, and hope to speak a lot more about here in the near future. And so we're going through talking with various developers out there, or architects, if that's what their title currently is, that do these types of roles. Some of them do it more in some pillars and some in the others. Some do lots of style guides. Some people do lots of more like style systems. Today, actually, we're going to be speaking with a special guest that works in a realm we actually haven't had a chance to talk about too much in this show yet, which is the testing processes, especially with visual regression testing, as well as the process pillar. This whole concept of how do we get code from a developer's hands through the whole process, everything that has to happen in the code, out to the repo or wherever, like however it actually gets to the client. Not really the ops part, but how that gets to that final state so it can actually be delivered. Because there's a lot to it. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of code. There's a lot of processes. So today I am excited to say, Kevin, thanks for coming on Sass Bites, and how's it going?
Thanks for having me, first of all. This is really cool to be here. It's going good. Cold front just blew through down in San Antonio, so.
So it is warmer in Portland than it is in Texas, what you're telling me.
Oh, yeah? I don't know.
Well, we're probably a good 60 degrees right now, so unless you have a cold front.
Yeah. We've got that.
Yeah, so if anyone wants good weather and you're dying out in the east and anywhere else, come up to Portland. It's great. I turn my camera around and make everyone really jealous, but I just won't do that today. So we're excited to have you on. Kevin is a front-end developer at Four Kitchens. He helps organize Hill Country JavaScript, which is a meetup group out there in San Antonio. I've actually spoken at it remotely. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure he'd like to hear about it. I actually spoke about CSS too, so you guys are pretty flexible about the stuff you're doing, not just JavaScript.
Yeah, mostly front end.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we do with the Sass meetup too. Is we're going to be talking about Grunt next week. It's not specifically Sass, but it's front endy. It's around that same realm. You've worked for various agencies, both large and small, and you've got a couple of kids that apparently keep you quite busy. So I certainly know how that goes. Your oldest is a little older, but I think we actually had our youngest around exactly the same time. Mine was, I'm going to die if I get it wrong, May 30th?
I'm the same way.
Yeah, it's like May 29th, May 30th. I think it's May 30th.
One of those days.
End of May, before June.
There's the due date, and then there's the actual date, and that's confusing.
Yes, exactly. And we haven't had a birthday yet to celebrate it, to solidify that in. That's my excuse at the moment. Because October 26th for my daughter is locked in. I'm good with that one. Yeah. So if you want to crack my passwords, now you know all the information you need. Just kidding. So happy to have you on. You apparently you've been doing a lot with visual regression testing, and you just put out a couple awesome blog articles. I know personally I've retweeted. I'll be sure to get those out in Sass Bites as well. But we're going to talk about those in just a little bit. But before we do that, I want to jump into some sassy drama because I got on Twitter last night and my Twitter feed was just exploding. It was crazy. If you haven't heard about it yet, basically Compass is dead, long live Compass, or at least the Node version of Compass, which is now called IGlass. So if you haven't been following kind of Sass trends in general recently, the general resounding is I'm ditching Compass, I'm moving off of Ruby, I'm getting over to Node, and loving mostly everything about it. Not because Compass was horrible, and I got actually a blog article I want to pull up about this. Compass was awesome, and it did what it needed to do in the day that it was around, and I think we just kind of outgrew it. It was really obviously rooted in Ruby and did a lot of stuff that we just didn't need anymore. But there were some awesome things that Compass did do as far as making it easy to pull in extra frameworks, be able to write custom functionality, and do some of those custom stuff that was really needed in the Node environment. So Chris Epstein just actually announced this last night. He's actually out here in Portland at EmberConf. He just did the closing keynote for that. And the the big announcement was that they're basically ending development of Compass as a Ruby framework. It's basically ceasing. Because even in Ruby, they're still using Grunt, and at least I'm sure some are, Grunt and Node and those kind of things. So focusing on Node, they can build something that's going to be universally useful, regardless of the platform you work on. And what IGlass is going to be, IGlass, if I haven't said that yet, that's what it's going to be called. It's basically going to be all the stuff about Compass that was special, like all the CSS3 mixins. Like we've got tons of repos that already do that. Get into Bourbon or something. All of the CSS3 like vendor prefixes, like auto prefixer, like there's so many other solutions for that. So IGlass is going to focus on really the core elements, which is being able to pull in some other Node module or an npm or a Bower module or something, whether it be SUSE grids or Breakpoint or something like that, and easily tap into it. Because right now we currently have to travel out our path and across Grunt and into our lib folder and wherever that is. It's really tough to get to those. So it's going to simplify that process. It's going to make it easier to build those items, as well as going to allow us to tap into Sass and add additional functionality to it. So say pass in some JSON data or create some additional functions, do some crazy math that Sass doesn't currently do. Whatever. I mean, it's kind of sky is open. Like you can write Node modules that now affect the Sass compilation and the Sass output. So I know we had Ben Frayne on just a couple weeks ago, and he talked about how he was moving away from Sass, partially because he wanted to do more with it, but he couldn't without writing Ruby or writing C or something like that. And so he was moving a lot to more post-processors, which you could do with JavaScript and Node. So now we've got the ability to kind of do that same thing in the pre-processing space using IGlass. So I know I'm excited about it. We had big conversations this morning in FlowDoc and everywhere. So I know as soon as it's gotten solidified, Chris already said he'll come on the show and talk about it, once there's an actual release out, because right now it's in very early beta preview stage. So Kevin, did you have any thoughts? Were you kind of excited to hear some of this news, or it's kind of like, we'll see?
No, yeah. I'm excited because I was also on that camp of using less because it's a Node module, and all the rest of the system is Node. So why bring in Ruby for one dependency? So I don't think this completely gets rid of that, but it does open up a lot more opportunity for front-end developers who are familiar with JavaScript to kind of take advantage of Node.
Yeah. I mean, I know personally, I've been writing a ton of just random Node stuff, and I had never expected myself to be saying that, but you start messing with Grunt a little bit, and then you start messing with the Node modules, and you're like, oh, I'm actually modifying and editing and adding functionality to this Node module. So yeah, taking that to actually building those modules to do something in Sass it's exciting for me. I mean, just the possibilities out there are pretty endless, and we also get the speed of Node Sass as well. So it should be a whole ton of fun. So Compass is dead. Long live Compass, i.e. IGlass. So pretty excited to see that coming. So let's dive into the meat and potatoes of what we do here, and we talk to Kevin about what he's up to and some of the exciting stuff that he's doing right now. So first thing I like to ask my guests is, when was the first time that you realized that you were a front-end architect, or that you cared more about how the code was built, not just about what the code was that was built?
Yep. For me, it was working at USAA, which is a large financial services company in San Antonio. We have 3,000 or so developers working on various parts of either the internal application for the member reps, or for the website, or for phone integration, things like that. So a very large development team. Not all of them doing the website work, but again, it's enterprisey. So during that time, I made that transition. I had been working at smaller agencies before then, building small, quote-unquote small, like 50-page Drupal sites, WordPress sites, custom sites like that. And it's just the difference in maintainability of your HTML and CSS and reusability is completely different when you go between a small site and a large site. And I gave a talk about this many years ago about basically the idea that what works for a really small site, what's really good for a really good small site, isn't necessarily good for a large site. So I learned that through pain and suffering and inheriting CSS that had grown from 1,000 lines to 5,000 lines and many different files and overrides, and why, realizing that IDs, like that time when you come to understand that using IDs in your selectors isn't as wonderful as it was made out to be at the beginning, and that was tough to give up because it sounded really good. IDs for a single selector for a single element that's never reused, and classes for things that are reused, but in reality it has a lot of drawbacks that the benefits don't really outweigh them. So yeah, I made a switch there, or I was given the opportunity to join the infrastructure team for the website at USAA, and that experience really changed my viewpoint of like how can I provide a good architecture for the front end for many different types of developers, different skill levels, all of that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had no idea you worked on the infrastructure team there. I'd love to dive into that just a bit. I think most front-end developers come from these small agencies working on mom and pop shops, working on these small 25 to 50 page sites, and that's how we're coming in experience-wise into this realm. So to come from something where you're actually creating that platform, where you're creating the tools for the developers, that's something not a lot of us get to experience. So what was, I guess in a nutshell, what was that experience like? What were the things you were doing, and what was your daily work like?
Right. A lot of it was figuring out how to get stuff done in that sort of environment. Like how do you push something out to production without breaking 20 pages for when you have a 3,000 page site or a 2,000 page site. I don't know how big it is, but that's a lot of pages to regression test, and you have no idea who owns every single piece, and there's partner sites and there's all these different things going on. So it was really overwhelming, to say one thing. When I first got there, they kind of handed me the keys. They were like, hey, here's our current documentation, here's our current standards, make this what you want it to be. And I was like, oh wow, I have no idea what I want it to be, and I don't really know if I am qualified to know what I want it to be. But thankfully they were patient and kind of allowed me the room to ruminate on it and consider all the different parts, and I had some great mentors there as well who kind of pointed me towards OOCSS way back when OOCSS was new, and then jumping into SMAX and all these different methodologies for patterns and standards to go through. So that was really exciting, and it difficult at the same time. So
I'm sure it's putting out lots of fires and trying to basically create the impossible, especially with systems that are already in progress. I mean, that's always the challenge of, how do you deal with 2 years worth of technical debt in a short couple months, while also, moving forward and building new features and everything. It's a tall order.
Luckily, there was a major overhaul, kind of a infrastructure part or 2.0, where they had two different server-side systems going, and they were building a brand new one, the second version, and with that came a brand new HTML, CSS, JavaScript starting point. So we were able to kind of start with a fresh slate, and that really helped a lot. But there's the idea. One of my coworkers has his rule, Jeffrey's rule of every 6 months you look back and you kind of look at disgust of what your code used to be, because you've learned so much in those past 6 months, which is really good. But you kind of have to get comfortable with either way you're going to do it wrong. It's just you have to make a gut decision at that point and hope for the best.
Yeah, it's how well you can learn from that. I always find it funny when somebody asks, with like visual regression testing or any of these new tools and processes we're trying to put in place. It's like, so how many projects have you done this on before? Like, You realize I've been working for you for the last year, and before that I was like on one project for 6 months. So like I've touched like 2 projects in the last 2 years. So my opportunities to try this thing on a project is very slim. Yeah, I mean, and unless you're going like 3 months on a project over and over and over and over again, where basically every time we start a new project, the entire landscape, the entire tool set, our entire approach is completely brand new. And it's crazy that we have to do that, but the front end landscape is changing so rapidly. Even within this project, when I started working with Red Hat, we had one approach, one methodology. Halfway through, we went a completely different direction with completely different tools, and and 6 months from now, if we were to do it again, it'd be completely different again. So it is crazy how fast all this stuff moves. But
right now you got to work with IGlass.
Exactly.
Get rid of Compass and start switching over.
I know that's one of our main things. That we'd love to get our build process moved completely over to Node Sass or to libsass.
Right.
It'll happen eventually. We'll get there. Right now it's not the thing that's holding us up, fortunately, because we're not really a huge system. So I'm sure we'll hit that pain point eventually.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. How do you know when the time to switch? Like there was a discussion between switching from Grunt to Gulp, and Grunt was working great, except it's a little bit slower, and the configuration is a little bit different. So you have a lot of tools built in Grunt, that you're already using and in place and already tested, and the bugs have been mostly fixed. To switch to Gulp, you kind of have to do that all over again. And you have to figure out, is this going to pay off, and how long, and when's the right time, and everything. So
and that's the thing you have to decide with any change in process. I mean, we completely changed like our markup methodologies. We went from a very like heavily nested, we'll get down that selector by 5 different things, and boom, okay, now we hit it, to completely flat selectors. And it's a completely different approach of breaking things up into layouts and components versus kind of just styling the whole thing. It took some trust from the management at Red Hat to say, go ahead and start doing this thing, because it took us a bit of time to get to get it under our feet, to figure out how we were going to be doing it, and what the final product was going to look like, and went through a couple of iterations. And so they've given us a lot of time, but we've now gotten to a place where we can turn out new designs on a drop of a hat, because everything's modular. We just put the pieces together, and we've got their new design already to brand standard. So anyway, discussion for another time. So so you talked about with all those pages, the challenge was regression testing. So have you been doing visual regression testing ever since then, or is that something new that you've been coming into?
No, that's something that I've been wanting to do since then. Again, it's the gamble of this is going to take a fair amount of upfront effort to get in place, and how useful will it be down the line? Which, in theory, it's got such power to it if you can get things in place, but it does take a lot of upfront effort. So it's mostly been like an interest of mine, starting back when I ran across Wraith and was like, hey, this is a really simple setup to jump into, and really easy to get started. Oh, but what about sites behind a password or a login? Okay, well, we got that hooked up. Okay, well, what about JavaScript stuff? And Wraith does have the ability to get through that. You just have to set that up, and it seems like there's always something new kind of blocking your way towards it being really effective. And the other thing is, if you're getting false errors, that makes your report really tedious and hard to, you can't integrate it into a build system and have automated failures, because sometimes there's just a difference between live and staging, or live in your local server just because of the data.
For people that haven't caught this, like what is regression testing? What is regression testing? How does that work? We kind of jumped right past that one.
Regression testing, it is, or visual regression testing specifically, is the way that you can take screenshots of either the entire website or portions of the website, different elements based off the CSS selectors, and compare those either to a local copy. So say you take a baseline snapshot before you start work, and then you do your work, make your change, and then take another snapshot and compare the two, and then get like a visual diff of the two images, which is basically they gray out almost all the page, and then just show the specific errors non-grayed out, so it's easier to visually see.
That you're comparing pixels is basically what it's doing. Did the pixel change from green to blue? Yep. All right, something's different.
Yeah. Yep. And Wraith does that. Phantom CSS does that. Diffuse does that. All different tools. There are other types of UI regression testing tools. There's one called Hardy.io, which I had looked at a while back, which it does kind of CSS computed style comparison. So you say, I want this computed style, and then it checks your selector and it says, is that the computed style for this element rendered on the page?
Yeah. So like, is the font size is supposed to be 18 pixels? Is it actually 18 pixels on the page? And yeah, I know I looked in those too, and I think for some spot checking that can be really cool. But what happens when you change a variable that is just going to cascade down and change a dozen things? And you're good with that because that's what it's supposed to do. But now all of your tests have to be updated to these new values. It's like having to write your CSS all over again or something like that.
Yeah, that's what held me back from it, was needing to do that. I don't want to have to maintain two CSS code bases.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. Whereas when you have like functional testing in JavaScript, you have a finite number of functions that always output the same. Like you put 2 and 4 in, and you always get 6. You don't get 8. You always get 6. So you can always test that, and that's not something that's going to just randomly change because you decide to make a modification to a style somewhere or something like that.
Right.
So then the advantage of the visual regression, especially with baseline or something, is creating new baselines, which is basically figuring out what that gold standard is it takes like 20 seconds. You hit a button and it just runs all those visuals, and now you have 18 pixels is that big on the page, and it's always going to be that big on the page, so you can compare it from the old to the new. So yeah, it'll be interesting, like maybe to get some like Hardy worked into workflow. Maybe it's just checking like some font sizes or some paddings, or I'd be curious to see if anyone has a way to kind of combine those together to like maybe catch, like they look for like specific pieces or something like that, or maybe problem areas, or I'm not sure. So that's an interesting.
The other option is you could like snapshot your computed styles. So in the same way that you create a baseline of your images, you can create a baseline of these are all the computed styles on the page right now. I'm going to make my changes.
That certainly makes sense. Could Hardy do that, or is that something else?
It kind of can, if I remember correctly, but I don't think it was very well integrated. There were where you could select an element on a page, kind of like you do in Chrome Inspector or Firefox, the Inspector, and then say, I want to check on these properties. Okay. That's the other thing is, what happens when you have some properties that, like height, you don't want to check height on a paragraph if that height's going to change based on the content.
Yeah, so definitely.
It's so tricky. There's so much nuance to it.
I could see that. That'd be really interesting about the snapshots being basically like just a big JSON array of this selector, these properties, and these values, and then you'd be able to choose which values you're actually checking. That makes perfect sense, as long as you can basically run one command and grab new baselines and move on from there. Honestly, I think that would almost be as good as visual regression testing. Though it's nice to be able to see how things interact with visual, of like, did something break something you didn't expect? Together they work fine, but you put them next to each other, now they break or something.
Yeah.
But yeah,
one is overlapping the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, whatever that case is, or a modal doesn't pop up or doesn't look the right way, or whatever the case is. But it's just seriously, it's amazing though that we now have multiple ways that we can test these things. Whereas just a bit ago, like it was just just cowboys. We just go out there and just write code and we throw it out. And if somebody finds an error, we go and fix it. And then that causes another error, we go and fix that. And that was our life. I mean, I've spent years with that kind of motto. And to be able to realize that we can actually build a component and then write a test for that component, and it just makes me excited. I gave a talk about this at PDXS a couple weeks ago, and or just last month, and lots of dropping jaws of like, you can do this now, like it's that easy. So yeah, it's a ton of fun. I know you said you've been working with Wraith. I know I played with that first. I was like the first. The great thing with Wraith is like it's one config file. It's so simple. It's like a config file in a gem, and you're done. But it does, yeah. It has some limitations as far as it's very page based. And like I don't know, does it have Casper as dependency, or does it really use it?
I think it does. I know it uses Phantom.
Yeah, I think it's a dependency. I just don't know if you can actually tap into it to use it. As he looks it up apparently. CasperJS. So to talk about just the tools here real quick. PhantomJS is a headless browser. It's a way of basically spinning up a WebKit instance to render a page in a headless state, which basically means it's all rendered, it's all there, accessible to Node and to memory and everything, but it doesn't actually spin up Chrome and all the weight that comes around that. But with that spun up, you can do things like you can test values, you can grab values out of it, you can actually interact with the DOM, you can take pictures of it, and that's really where it kicks in for us. Then CasperJS is an interface that allows you to interact with that DOM. So you've got this virtual DOM, this virtual web page that doesn't display. You can't look at it. You can't click a mouse or a keyboard to interact with it. So Casper allows you to actually interact with that canvas or that page. Better way to say it. So if you want to enter some keystrokes, if you want to move the mouse, if you want to click on something, if you want to inject some JavaScript, there's tons of things you can do with. I mean, if you want to fill out a form and basically walk through a process, Casper allows you to do that. Like fill the form out, click, hit the next button, click, 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 hit back button. I mean, it can walk through all those steps, and not only can do it, but it does it in an automated process. So every single time it does it exactly the same way. So I know for us, what this allows us to do is spin up a page and then use Casper to click, fill out a field, and then click the submit button and see the result. And then you can take a snapshot of that. So did Wraith do that as well, or were you looking at something else?
It says it uses either PhantomJS, CasperJS, or SlimerJS, which SlimerJS is pretty much the same thing except for Firefox or Gecko.
I think that's the engine underneath.
Yeah, and I think though SlimerJS isn't headless, so it actually opens up the browser and
interesting.
Does that, which kind of has a benefit to me because one of the things that I found with using Phantom is it's not the same thing as Chrome. While using engine, you've got different layouts. The pre-2.0 version of Phantom doesn't support Flexbox, and I'm starting to do a lot more Flexbox. And so now my if I were using the pre-2.0, which I'm trying to move off of, it's
2.0 just came out like a couple weeks ago, right? Last month or so.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into the next point of one of the hardest part for me is getting the environment set up for these tests. I was struggling with the fact that Wraith needs a specific Ruby version, and that's different than the Ruby version defined in my gem file. And then if I wanted to try using diffuse, which is diff-ux, I think it's diffuse, or diff-ux, then that's a different Ruby version. I think you went over this when you did your regression testing screencast, where you had to switch Ruby versions, and it's and
the fact I pulled that off still amazes me.
I know, because you can't ever remember what you did to get it working, because you did 20 different things, and then you get it working like,
and then finally worked once, and you're like, whatever magic incantation, I have no idea. So yeah, I know for me, Phantom CSS has just been awesome in the fact that it's all node based. It all runs just in Grunt. You can really customize the whole testing suite and the whole testing process because of that. And I know I didn't get a chance to record the one at PDX Sass, so when I get a chance, once all these interviews are done, I'm probably going to try and redo that one here in Sass Bites as well, so we'll get a chance to dive into that. So it sounds like you've also been doing several workshops. You were talking to me just a bit ago about you did one Minneapolis?
So I did one at SassConf last October, I think.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the last few were coming into SassConf.
Right. Yeah. That went really well. The biggest issue was environmental issues between everybody's different laptops, which is exactly what I expected. I have one upcoming on April 14th in Minneapolis. at Mini WebCon, and that'll be covering mostly the same material. I'm hoping this time I can get a little bit more fine-tuned and see if I can use something like Vagrant, which is a VirtualBox kind of setup.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, hoping for that, so that
you have these consistent environment that's already set up. You just pull down and run.
Yep. That's the hope. Nice. I've had issues with it so far.
No doubt. It's typically like you can follow along if you want to, but otherwise just watch me. That's kind of how it went at my presentation.
Yeah.
What all do you go over in these workshops? What do you cover?
I cover what visual regression testing is. We get into hands-on exercises with Wraith, with Phantom CSS, and with Diffuse. Just try out all three of them. The idea is to kind of provide a sampling because they are very different tools that do different things and are used different ways. I think Wraith is wonderful for an intro and for like a very static website that might have a few responsive design elements to it. It's really great for that. I want to get it set up for something like my blog because that would be nice to know if I do make updates. Hey, go grab screenshots of this static page and see if anything changed. Without investing too much time into defining all the selectors and everything. Yeah, but it's very hands-on. That's one thing that I've kind of found with workshops is I really prefer hands-on workshops. I prefer the exercises to be defined and written out to where I can go at it at my own pace if I want to. I don't want to have to, or if I want to go faster than everybody else, if I want to go slower than everybody else, the exercise is there. My hope is to provide some sort of facilitation and help with debugging and that sort of bit. But
so it's not as much teaching, but like here's a course, walk through it. I help you walk through it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, like 2 slides. I'll show you a demo. I used to do a little bit of high school teaching, and there was the pattern of I do, we do, you do. So I'll do something, we'll do something together, and then you'll do something on your own. To kind of ease over, and that's kind of the pattern that I try to follow because it works fairly well for that kind of workshop thing. So
nice. Well, I'm picking your brain right now for an obvious reason. For those that don't know, Kevin and I are signed up to actually give a visual regression workshop at CSS DevConf October 26th. Well, CSS DevConf is October 26th to 28th. We'll be doing our workshop on the 28th, which is where all the workshops are. It's going to be down in Long Beach, California. Should be nice and sunny. And on the Queen Mary, which is just going to be awesome. It's just like this big cruise boat. They just docked on the side, on the water, and so you got these big nautical suites, and the showroom there looks amazing. So anyway, regardless, we're going to be there. It's going to be awesome, and I'm curious your approach because obviously I want to bring something to the table, and it sounds like what you've got going works quite well. And you're going to be taking it. You were giving like shorter, like 2 or 3 hour workshop. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it was a 4 hour, 3 or 4 hours, but with breaks it drops down to 3.
Yeah. So I think we're going to be doing upwards like 5 or 6. So it's like a full day workshop. So
which is great because there's a ton you can get into.
It's really a lot of fun. So if you're interested in that, again, it's going to be October 28th down in Long Beach. It's going to be a full day workshop on regression testing with Kevin and I. You can actually go to the CSS DevConf website now and sign up for that. It is an additional cost on top of going to the conference, but hopefully you have awesome employers that want you to learn this stuff and come back and implement this stuff. We'll pay you to send you over there. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun. I know we should probably get started on developing this thing, right?
yeah, maybe.
Maybe might as well. So cool. Let's jump on to this next thing that it was just so like we talked weeks ago about setting this up, about having this conversation today, and just yesterday, the day before, you threw a tweet out of like, hey, anyone want to just do a quick technical review of this blog article, and read the blog article. I'm like, okay, this is awesome. To let the cat out of the bag, what it is, the title of the series was Empathic Infrastructure Code Management, of talking about how can we manage code, how can we deploy code, how can we basically work in a large environment and work with build tools and source code and process code, and how can we function in a team like that? Because oftentimes we're extremely dysfunctional in that respect. So you have a couple articles out already. The first one was just the concept of empathic infrastructure code management and the whole separation concept, right? Do you want to give us a quick kind of summary of what that was?
Sure. Let me actually bring up the blog post because I have to remember what I wrote.
Show notes.
Basically, that at a certain point when you're building out your code base, if you're working on a very large project or trying to build a very large project, you're going to have multiple pages, multiple sections of the site, and all those are going to share common stuff. Common page template, common class names for different components of your page, and common JavaScript functions, common JavaScript functionality, all of that, common CSS. So where does that live? Well, it usually goes in like a common folder for inside of your app directory. But at a certain point, that common folder becomes large enough to need its own living space. It kind of grows up and is ready to move out from its parents. So the idea there is to give it a separate code base with have a separate developer fully dedicated to it, because it really is enough work once you get if you're building a large scale app or an application. There are so many things going on at once that you can really dedicate a full person to it, whether to spend building common build tools, working in Grunt or Gulp to get that process down, making sure that the performance of the page is as good as it can be across the site, so you're serving all of your files correctly and kind of managing that. And by separating the code base out from separating the infrastructure code, that common code, out from all of your application code, so the page-specific code, you're able to take advantage of a few practices and models that the open source world follows, and for your internal stuff. So it's not about making your code open source necessarily. It's about seeing, okay, this is what the open source world does to support. Think of all the websites that jQuery supports. Not directly, but just by providing the framework, the library. They have quite a large consumer base. How do they do that? Why not follow their patterns for our stuff? So that's kind of what the first post is about, kind of making that point. The second post is one of the biggest change for me that you can get to from having the separation, which is the idea of pushing your updates out to people is the normal way of doing it. I make a change, and as soon as I release that code, it's pushed out to every other app out there, and they are now on the latest. So basically, you just have a latest version, nothing before that, really. And while that's good for quick iteration and getting stuff out there, it's also great at breaking your site and introducing regression bugs, and subsequently slowing things down, because now you have to wait for app A or section A of your site to get fixed. So somebody either has to work the weekend, or you have to roll back that release, and now you have code sitting in kind of this middle part where it's not being, it's ready to go out, it's just waiting for an app to fix it. So that's where we get into that idea of allowing, you release the code, but you release it in the same way that jQuery, if they release an update, they're not going to update all of the applications out there and expect it to just work. They push their version out, and then they wait for people to pull it down. So that's that pull.
That's the whole notion of semantic versioning as well. Mm-hmm. I'm on version 1.9.1, and that version's always going to be the same until I decide to move to 1.9.2 or 2.0 or something like that. So, and if you move to 1.9.2 and it's broken, you can switch back to 1.9.1 and you're good to go. I know it's hilarious just to have read on that article you just put out, last night or even today or something like that.
Last night.
I read it, of course, and then I was working on our build tool that supports the product we're building, and I think I put a bug into our build tool that then kept us from being able to do work for the stories that we had. So I was like, I should have separated my two out. And it was actually something I considered when we first started, was, because we kept on, making adjustments to our build tool, adding functionality and changing things, and we thought how nice it would be to have that as a separate, it's something separate from the stuff that actually gets built, because we have, style guide generators, and we have, all the servers that get spun up to show the style guide, and all these different things going on, all these linting and testing and whatnot. And that's a very separate process of building than the product that we're actually building with that tool. So keeping that separation is a great idea, because kind of some of the things you said was you're able then to test those changes on small teams. We're a couple, we're 2 or 3 people that are ingesting this build tool, but if you've got 100 people, 1,000 people that are using this build tool, you can't just be pushing up changes to the build tool and expecting life to just go on without problems.
Right.
But separating it out, pushing out releases, documenting releases. As much as I'm
listing out my next blog post.
No, sorry about that.
Semantic versioning, keep a change log, and what was the other part is node stability index.
Yes, yes,
kind of an interesting idea. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're actually doing that with what we're building is kind of we're building our own little framework style guide, which does get ingested by another system, which is actually just a Drupal system, so it gets ingested as a theme, and we do that version-wise. So they're working on 0.4 right now, and when 0.5 gets ready, and they're ready, and they've tested 0.5, and they're ready to push it out, they can do that whenever they're ready to, which for us frees us up to we can merge like crazy. We can build stuff and pull it in, and we can build, and then when it's ready to actually get into the Drupal system, when it actually gets through there, there's the code review, and there's the regression testing, and everything that they do on code that we don't have to do on every single merge. And that's the main reason we separated, because we were originally building the theme inside of that Git repo, which every single time we want to do just a small change to the build system, but to change to the Git repo, which has to go through full testing. Because we have to make sure the change to our build system, even though it's just this grunt thing over here, isn't breaking Drupal over there. So yeah, we've been able to separate those two out. We've got a build system that creates a theme, which Drupal that can use in a version process, and it's amazing how much faster we can iterate because of that separation. Is I think what you're kind of talking about. A little time for setup, but the gain of it is pretty tremendous.
Yeah, yeah. I also get into a couple of drawbacks of it. One, it is harder for the application to pull down the updates. It's a little bit of extra effort. They have to remember to do that. That's another tough thing, is remember to update your dependencies. There is a dependency manager out there called David DM, which I've used in the past to kind of, oh yeah, I need to update my dependencies. Oh yeah, okay, let's put up a story to update dependencies and just validate that everything works still. So that's really useful. I don't know if that works for internal code, but it is a little bit tough there. And the other part of it is, how do you keep it visually consistent if section A of your site is using 1.4.9 or 1.4.11, and section B wants to upgrade to 1.5.2 or 1.5.0, and that .4 to .5 is a breaking change or a minor change, and turns out it changed the buttons from 10 pixels padding in green to 20 pixels padding and fuchsia or something.
Sounds like a lovely site.
Right. Don't let me design your site. How do you keep those two user experiences in sync? Because it's okay from a developer to have a different version that you're working against, internally. That's something that you can accept as a developer. Is okay, in this version I have to use this function name, and this one I have to use a different function name. But as a user, you want to see a complete site that is constant, has the same look and feel throughout the site. My defense of that is there's no magic bullet for it. So at USA, when I was working there, we had two different button treatments because they created a new button treatment and they updated some pages and they didn't update others. Even though the CSS was there, there was still that inconsistent button treatment because it's hard, you know.
And the thing is, even without this disparate like deploy system, there's always random buttons and random sizes. So it's certainly not a new thing for us to have to deal with like different size things in different places. But I think one of the other things you said was to try and group those visual changes together rather than having them, you know, spread out over various changes. So yeah, maybe you'll have like a, you know, here's our 3.0 is coming out. It's got some major visual changes and maybe it doesn't launch until, you know, a majority of the platforms are on board with that, so that there's a consistent change, and there's a couple outliers, and that's fine. But you know, you might be able to coordinate something more coordinated with that.
Right. Coordinate the coordination.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Basically, take a little bit of extra time, take it a little bit slower, just to make sure that all the teams are ready and lined up. Give the teams time to finish what they're currently working on, and then say, okay, next cycle, we're all going to do this at the same time because that's what we need. And hopefully you don't end up doing that once a month or once a week, because then you're not doing something right.
Yeah, I mean that's like a once a year brand refresh or something like that, and you've got stories the months leading up to it that is getting everyone up to speed, so they're on the version right before it. And then you start pushing out alpha builds. You've got visual regression testing in there to make sure you catch any bugs. And I mean, it is doable. I mean, it's something you can do. It is complexity that we can handle with the tools that we have. And it's just kind of as you were talking before, before the show, is you get into a new process and you get to this point. And you're like, okay, now I got to figure out how to get past that point. And you get past that, and you're like, okay, now I'm to this next point. How do I get past that point? So yeah, there's always going to be another hurdle down the road. But the awesome thing is we get to look back and see just how many hurdles have we already come over to get to this point. We don't have one JavaScript file and one CSS file and static HTML anymore. We've moved so beyond that that's not even funny. And a couple of years from now, that kind of concern will be no big deal because we've worked out processes to make that it's a business decision, and you're willing to take a little risk for the reward that comes with it, and they're willing to pay the money to make sure that happens, and it comes down to it, and you can execute it, and no big deal. So but it brings up those questions you never had to deal with before, and you got to find those pain points. But you find them, and you do it.
I think that's the most important part of it, is you're not hiding the complexity. You're not ignoring the fact that you have a very large site. You're not saying, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes, push that button, and hope it all works out. No, you are taking the time. You're understanding the cost of updates, the cost of visual redesigns. I mean, you can't just say, I want to just do a visual redesign without understanding that it's going to take a lot of time and it's going to take a lot of developer hours. And that's a good thing if the visual redesign works, and it's just be aware of that before you jump into it. So
definitely. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to how many more blog posts do you think you're going to have come out in the series?
A ton.
A ton.
Yeah. So I have the next part on, let's see, the version control, and that's kind of, semantic versioning, node stability index, changelogs. That's kind of the code infrastructure maintenance part of it. The next part I want to get into is what I think is just as important, which is the human aspect of it. How do you keep your developers? How do you get developers to contribute to your code base? How do you break down the barrier of intimidation and hey, I'm new to this company. I don't want to do something that's going to get egg on my face or anything. I don't want to make a mistake.
Ask a stupid question.
Yeah,
or something.
Yeah, and that's perfectly natural as a developer, as a human being, to have that feeling. And so as a culture, you want to build something that kind of is more welcoming to that. And so that's where I get into the idea of reducing the friction to contribute. Every friction you have towards a contribution holds people back from contributing, and rewards like, hey, if the person who gets the most commits gets a $100 gift card. That doesn't work in the long run, and it doesn't encourage good behavior. You want to do things that take a little bit more time or a little bit harder to do, but get better stuff out of it. So it makes me think of Chris's talk last night, or not last night, but his EmberConf. You know, he talked about IGlass, but I think there was another really important part that he made, just talking about the Ember community and what it means to quote unquote win or be number one. And maybe you don't want to be number one. Maybe number two is good. You know, we don't have to do everything to absolute perfection. You got to balance it all out. You got trade-offs and all that. So I get into that, and then I'm trying to see if there's anything less. Kind of talk about documentation, and oh man, so much. There's just a whole bulleted list of different things to cover with just running a project. So
yeah, it's architecture. It's talking about how the project comes together, how you manage the project. For those that don't know, I've kind of put it out there a little bit. I'm actually in the process of writing a book on front-end architecture at the moment, and I was trying to find the best way to kind of preface it and to start everything up. And often what people do is just look at definitions, and I just Googled architect. You know, it's what you do when you want to write. You just Google it. And,
or give a speech.
Or give a speech, exactly. And the first thing that came up was that an architect, if I remember plans, remember exactly, it's design, plans, and oversees the construction of a building. And that's really it. Like we have a lot of design phase where we figure out like how does this whole system work. We have a lot of the plan phase of, you know, what are the tools, how they work together. But then also this oversight part of like, you know, that this project isn't done as soon as you turn in your documentation or you turn in your plan. Like you're constantly looking at like, you know, how are people using these tools? Like, are they succeeding? Are they failing? Like, what are the incentives? What are the stumbling blocks? Like, how can we continually make this process more effective and more efficient for the people that are using it? So that oversight thing I think was really neat. I didn't actually expect to see that in the architect definition, but it made so much sense. Is, you know, that's what we're doing right now in our project is like, hey, this thing we're doing right now, it's grown to a scale that's not working. So how can we split it up? How can we make it work again? And what opportunities does that bring up? And yeah, it's neat. As we continue to refactor architecture, we're learning more and more and more about what it takes to be efficient with the work that we do. So yeah, that's going to be a ton of fun to see those articles keep coming out. And I hope they don't stop. Maybe we should like do a podcast or something on them.
Yeah, it's all spurred on by a talk that I'm giving later this month, and I hope to give elsewhere. So hopefully I get most of it out before the talk, but there's a lot. But yeah, it's really interesting to me because I don't know, it's a bit deeper than like what's the most efficient selector or something like that.
Definitely, it's getting into the human aspect of it,
right.
Getting into how do people's minds work and how do people work. So it'll be fun to do. So as we close up, what other stuff are you up to? I think you had a couple of speaking engagements you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, the talk I just referenced was at Space City JS, which is in Houston. That'll be a one-day conference, and the more I'm giving a talk on open source as a project model for internal work, which is basically what we just talked about, like all the things that open source projects do to get past the challenges they face. All of those relate to things that we do internally in our day-to-day work, and we basically just covered all of it. So that's what the talk will be about. I'm most excited about the day before. There's a pre-conference party at St. Arnold Brewery, which is a Houston Texan brewery, and it's got some really great beer. So unfortunately, my talk is first thing in the morning. I don't know how I'm going to reconcile those two. But I have that.
First thing in the morning is 10 a.m., right?
No.
No. If only.
Yeah, if only. But that really cruel of them to do that. Yeah, that we have the MiniWebCon workshop, or I have it, and then our CSS DevConf workshop as well, and trying to get other stuff out there, but you know, it is what it is. I can't fill up the schedule too much because 2 kids. That's,
2 kids. We'll
that's
do
another
it.
thing that I
You've
want
got that like 8:30, 9 o'clock once all the kids are in bed till whenever you crash because you have to wake up at 5 o'clock because that's when the young one that decides to wake up. That's my life right now. 5:15 is just not a good hour for someone to wake up.
That's this morning was 5:45.
Yeah, actually, I got 5:55 this morning. My alarm almost went off this morning. I was really excited. So, anyway,
setting alarms.
I know. What's up with that? I don't need an alarm. I've got a 9-month-old. It's incredible. So, Kevin, thanks for coming on. Thanks for the perfect timing of bringing this blog series out right as we get into this. Excited to read more about it and talk more about it. Maybe when it's wrapped up, I can come back on and we can kind of finish the conversation where we started.
Sure.
So, thank you. Looking forward to learning a ton from you as we do this workshop in October. So that's going to be awesome. So thanks for everyone that stuck around for the show. So I got a bunch of live viewers, which is really always encouraging. I appreciate everyone that watches now and watches once the broadcast is out there. Next week, I'm really excited about this next guest. She actually, it's kind of fun. She actually keynoted at CSS DevConf this last year, but she doesn't really do much CSS. She is Rebecca Murphy. She is more of a JavaScript architect, and so she came in speaking more just about learning experiences, and I think it was a big talk about flying, which is really a great talk. But we got to talking after giving my my architecture talk, and realizing there's a lot to talk about in the JavaScript realm of how do you properly architect the JavaScript portion of a large project, especially as it scales. Especially application needs. And so we're going to bring her on and talk about architecture, talk about JavaScript, and what that means for your project, whether you're just doing a small jQuery site or if you're throwing Angular or Ember, as that's the hot topic in Portland right now, or whatever the needs are of that project, and whether
only
it's
React.
Yeah, or React. Oh my gosh, that's our channels are blowing up with React right now too. It's crazy. And it's not always just what you build. Like, you don't have to be a JavaScript expert to actually go out and build those things, but knowing the different tools, knowing what they can do, and knowing the right tool for that job is really a lot of what the architecture process is going to be about. So if you need to bring her on and she's going to tell me I'm wrong about everything, which I probably am, which is good because I got to learn it if I'm going to start writing about it. So we look forward to that. So we'll see you next week. I believe it's going to be the same time, Thursday, 12 o'clock Pacific. Thanks for sticking around today. Thanks again for Kevin.
Thanks for having me
on today. It's awesome to finally get a chance to talk while we're not adversaries, which is always fun. So we'll actually be at the same workshop at the same time. It'll be so much better than separate talks at the same time.
Well, I'll be a better presenter though.
Well,
you can't win.
I'll have better animated GIFs in our back channel.
Oh man, I'm gonna spend the next 8 months going through this.
Awesome. Well, thanks for everyone for watching. Kevin, it's been awesome, and I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
See you, everyone. Bye.